That's what a good book does. That's what a good show does. That's what a good movie does. It makes you root for the bad guys somehow. It makes you not agree with, but it at least makes you understand the positions of the characters in the book. Welcome to this week's episode of the Globe Games podcast. And this week's episode is going to be somewhat of a continuation of what we talked about in the last week's episode, which was Catherine Fitz's appearance on the Tucker Carlson podcast. And the way I called that podcast was the most important podcast you've never listened to. And the reason why that podcast was so captivating for me, like I stated in the previous episode, Catherine Fitz has this unique career experience of being tied to big money and big government, and then seeing with a bird's eye view and with a behind the scenes sausage being made view of how big money and big politics are actually interconnected and who influences whom. And one of the things that Catherine Fitz mentioned in last week's podcast was the book Three Body Problem. Now, the reason why that podcast for me personally specifically was so captivating was just the mere mention of this book. The Three Body Problem is, in my opinion, the best science fiction representation of what would happen if planet Earth was invaded by aliens tomorrow. Those of you that may know me know that I am a lover of all things fiction. I love science fiction, I love horror fiction, I love the entire genre. Fiction, compared to nonfiction, good fiction, tends to do a really good job of marrying the paranormal, the impossible, and then grounding it with the everyday experiences, essentially reality. So what good fiction does is it imagines a paranormal, extra normal, extraordinary circumstance, theme, or plot, and then applies it to how we live reality. So what I mean by that is, to use an example, my favorite author is Stephen King. Now, many of you might scoff at that. That he is, he's not fast food fiction. He's not fast food science fiction. But I think just because he was such a prolific writer, just in sheer volume, that a lot of people tend to kind of like, you know what? You read one King novel, you read them all. That couldn't be further from the truth. And I love Stephen King because he just has that ability, like I stated, of marrying the paranormal with reality so that it makes fiction extremely believable. So in one of his most famous early books called Salem's Lot, it's essentially Stephen King's take on the vampire genre. And he basically, if vampires were to exist, quite literally were to exist, this is how they would look like. Another great book of his, and it's one of his best, in my opinion, is called The Stand. The Stand is a little poignant in light of recent world events, where The Stand was written in the early 90s, 1991, 2 or 3. I'll have that up on the screen once I get the actual year. But what The Stand is about, it's a thick book. It's huge. What The Stand is about is essentially a biological warfare agent that escapes, a lab. And King basically does a phenomenal job of describing a military grade virus with a essentially 98% mortality rate. And he describes a post infection, post death society, that and how that society looked like and how it was structured after essentially 97% of the population died off. And just like in Salem's Lot with the vampire, and just like in The Stand with this military grade virus, Stephen King takes these paranormal, extraordinary scenarios, grounds them in reality so that when you are reading these books, you're so enthralled, you're so engrossed, and the fiction is actually so believable that that's where the terror comes in. When you're reading a book specifically, because it's not a passive exercise like watching this video or watching a movie, because reading books is more of an active exercise, you have to use your imagination to paint these scenes. You have to use different voices for different characters. You have to essentially imagine the set and setting of what you are reading, because, you know, one of the reasons why movie adaptations of books are so disappointing for some people is because even the way that characters look like in their minds and the way that they look like in the film adaptations are wildly different, almost 180 degrees different in terms of temperament, in terms of pacing, in terms of emotional structure. So because books are such an active way of engaging the imagination, um, they 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 fire off so many neurons, and when you're reading this fiction, it makes you automatically wonder, almost as a byproduct, almost as a symptom of consuming this content, of painting this picture. It almost makes you consider, man, what if this actually happened? And The Stand was, in hindsight, very prescient. Obviously, COVID didn't have a 97% mortality rate, but it engaged the reader, myself included, and really it forces you to do a thought exercise and to actually ask yourself, what if? That is the that is the beauty of fiction. Like I said, it marries the paranormal with the real. It makes it very believable. Now, a certain subsection of fiction is called science fiction, obviously. Science fiction is extremely broad, and science fiction, in its own right, could be considered I would even classify science fiction outside of fiction, because obviously fiction is a huge umbrella, but science fiction has so much content in its own right that it could technically be, in my opinion, be categorized as its own genre, separate from fiction, just because fiction could literally be like a historical take with altered facts. That's fiction. Science fiction obviously involves, most of the time, certain physical impossibilities, such as really out into the future, or maybe something like time travel, metaverse explanations. With science fiction, it is the most deepest and most wide exploration of fiction. And science fiction holds a really dear place in my heart, because me, and my family, my brother and my whole family, but we were imprinted with the love of the stars when we were kids. My dad was a sailor, so in the 1970s, you still had to know how to use, quadrants, sextants, and you had to be able to know how to read the stars. God forbid, your electronical equipment goes down. So my dad was a huge lover of astronomy. My mom as well. And we lived at the time we lived, when I was growing up, in a town called Budva in the country of Montenegro. And this was in the early 90s when Halley's Comet was doing a pass. And I just remember as a kid First of all, in Montenegro, it's a small nation. At night, the Milky Way is, clearly visible. So, to all my country folk out there, that there's a every time it's night on a moonless night, when you can see the Milky Way just painted across the sky, it confronts you in a beautiful way, in almost like in a cosmic horror way. It confronts you with existential dread and existential beauty, and hmm, it confronts you, and it helps you put your own personal problems into perspective when you realize, hey, listen, like, we're a speck of dust on a speck of dust, and it kind of helps you frame your personal problems into a bigger picture of existence, and helps you kind of soothe your way um, through mortal issues, and makes you hope and wonder that your own life can be a contribution to this grander picture of existence. So as kids, like I said, my dad imprinted on me and my brother the love of astronomy, and it's as if it happened yesterday. Haley's Comet. I remember that one week it was there. Every week when we would be walking back from the Riviera, we were walking back home, and we're looking at Haley's Comet, and it was like you could see the ice dust coming off the tail. And me and my brother, like, I mean, I can't speak for my brother, but he loves astronomy as well. But myself, like, how could you not fall in love? How could you not? So, love of astronomy, always been there. Looking towards the stars as a child, and then as a result, any media that had to do with science fiction, UFOs, aliens, I would just ravage. Endless appetite. I can safely say that all good content on the genre, not all good, obviously not all good, but like most of the great content, um, I've gotten, not gotten, again, sorry. I'm on a beautiful journey of devouring and ravaging all of the content that has anything to do with aliens or our place amongst the stars. And as a result, excuse me, as a result, in my journey to consuming this type of knowledge, because it is knowledge, science fiction is knowledge, because it forces you to consider certain things. It forces you to consider bigger questions. It forces you to ask the bigger questions. It exposes you to people who have thought about things on a deeper level. and and then you understand, when you do read their content or when you do consume their content, you understand that, half the time I've thought about these things in my head, but that's the beauty of an artist, that's the beauty of an author. He or she has the ability to transcribe their thoughts into reality, whether it be in the form of writing, art, media, whatever it may be, so that us, the rest of humanity, can consume it, and it rings true in our souls, and it kind of confirms that more or less we are all on the same page when you think about this topic. So in my journey on exploring this topic of science fiction, specifically the alien subsection of science fiction, anything to do with extraterrestrial life outside of our home planet, of course I came across the Three Body Problem series. And I came across it by sheer chance. Thank you, YouTube algorithm. It was a couple of years ago. I got this weird, and I'll pull it up over here. I'll find it so I can give this guy credit. I'm not weird, so it's not a weird channel, but he's an interesting guy that does essentially book reviews. And I came across hit the out. I don't consume book content on YouTube. So the fact that the algorithm recommended it, again, thank you, and big shout out to that creator. I'll have him posted right now. Um, he basically, I think, if I remember correctly, the book was the title of his video was "The Most Terrifying Book Ever Written." And obviously, that's in terms of clickbait. Bravo, sir, bravo. So I was like, of course, I gotta check this video out. And once I opened up the video, within first 2 minutes, I was like, oh yeah, okay, right, I gotta read this book. And the book was The Three Body Problem. As stated in the last episode by Catherine Fitz, the reason why she read the book was Barack Obama. Obama apparently gave some speech where he basically gave a cryptic message to the viewers, to the listeners, to the audience, that basically said, hey, listen, these are the problems that I'm dealing with. These are the things that the administration and the species is dealing with. You can find these problems in the Three Body Problem book. So Catherine Fitz was like, this is an interesting hint. I'll take Barack Obama at his word, President Barack Obama at the time, and I'll read this book series. And of course, it's a 3-book series. I think it's a 4-book series now, but I read the 3-book series, the original. Once you read one, you have to read all of them. But the first one does a really good job of setting up the entire series and exploring the different themes, philosophies, and plot lines throughout the entire series. So basically, the first book lays everything out that's going to be discussed throughout the entire series. So the first book, if you don't love the first book, which I highly doubt, you don't even have to read the other 2 books. And when I watched that podcast with Tucker Carlson and Catherine Fitz, and she mentioned the 3-body problem and how she views reality through that lens after reading that book, it kind of confirmed a lot of the things that I view on reality, and the reason why I view reality through a certain type of lens. And books like The Three-Body Problem have affected the way that I view reality. And like the quote in the opening episode from last week by Carl Sagan goes, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. That is applicable to all facets of reality. So the things that I believe about reality, just because there's no evidence to support, there's plenty of circumstantial evidence, but just because there's no hard evidence to support my views does not mean that it's not the most sober, most clear, and most critical analysis of our current state of reality. More importantly, the state of reality, should it stay on this trend line, how it will look 100, 200, 300, 400 years, 1,000 years from now, 1,000,000 years from now. So if our current trajectory as a species, as a planet, if it continues, if we don't burn out, whether it be through self-induced burnout or through an exogenous event, you just have to look at the trends and then extrapolate, and that's how we're going to look like in the future. These types of thought exercises are actually very easy to do, and surprisingly, if you take a lot of people like deep thinkers, and it's so refreshing when you do eventually have these types of deep conversations with people that you've just met. It's surprising how people from all over the planet, once you do it, engage in these thought exercises, we come more or less to the same conclusion in terms of what the future holds for humanity. And what the future holds for humanity through a thought exercise like the 3-body problem, in my opinion, is the most accurate description of what were to happen if we knew we were about to be invaded by an alien force. Quite literally, extraterrestrial alien force in the most basic Hollywood sense. Not alien in terms of spirit, not alien in terms of illegal immigrants, aliens, bona fide aliens. So, as stated before, this book influenced Barack Obama, it influenced Catherine Fitz, and it sure as hell influenced me, even before the Catherine Fitz interview. I read the book 2-3 years ago, the entire series. The first book came out in 2008, if I remember correctly. So it was just really nice vindication when not vindication, but it's really nice to see what company you're in. Especially when you're trying to connect the dots, and especially when you're trying to look at the big picture. So as alluded to before, in last week's episode, because this book has been such a influential part of how I view reality and man's or humanity's place in the cosmos. I thought that doing a standalone episode just on the book series, or just particularly the first book, would do us well. So without further ado, essentially I'm going to delve into some of what the book is about, do a short synopsis from memory. It's not going to be all extremely accurate, but I'm just going to have a general overview of the book, and then we're going to discuss some of the pervasive themes throughout the book and the way that it describes a type of reality, in my opinion, that is more closer to fact than fiction. All right, so let's delve in. I'm a big believer in basically the following. If you want to understand the macro, look at the micro. So if you want to understand really complex human events, it's a really good starting point, launch pad, to look at something that's similar to that big event on a smaller scale. So for example, if you want to understand the government, look at your own family dynamics. If you want to understand big banks or the economy, look at your own balance sheet, your personal balance sheet, your expenditures, your costs. If you want to understand something as complex as war, look at human strife in general. When's the last time you had a fight with a family member, or with a loved one, or with your significant other? Or if you want to understand the way that humans operate in large groups, and just look at how animals operate in large groups. Ants, rats, schools of fish. So if we extrapolate that line of reasoning, ergo, understanding the macro is to look at the micro. You get a good understanding of the macro when you get a good understanding of the micro. You can have a hyper detailed understanding of the micro, and it'll give you a low resolution image of the macro. And now what I mean by that is, if you understand the dynamics of your own personal economic states, your own balance sheet, your own costs, your own assets, your own liabilities, you can more or less extrapolate that knowledge and apply it to something as complex as the international economy. Now, you won't have all of the precise details, but you'll have a low resolution image, essentially a vague image of how essentially the system operates. And it is the elite that want to convince you through complex jargon and essentially gatekeeping to convince you that you're too stupid and uneducated to understand something as complex as banking, the government, or the economy. That is false. The people that run our world are people. Never forget that. They're just as flawed as you and me. So, if we apply that logic of, in order to understand the macro, look at the micro, it goes without saying that if you want to understand galactic politics, universal politics, galactic faring civilizations, universal faring civilizations, look at planetary civilizations. That is to say, if you want to understand the motivations and the machinations of a multi-planetary civilization, so do this thought experiment in your head, that there is, in another star system, a planet that has aliens that look identical. And I'm not talking they're a little darker or lighter, taller. No, they're identical to you and me. They look identical. Now, the only difference between that civilization and our civilization is that they're present on 3 planets. So our solar system has 9 planets, we're present on 1 planet. And let's say in this thought exercise, their solar system has 15 planets, and they have physical presence on 3 planets. How would that civilization operate? What would that civilization be motivated by? More importantly, I only said that they have physical presence on only 3 planets. That is to say, they don't have full control of their solar system. They don't have control of their own star. So if we look at the Kardashev scale, which is essentially a scale that rates the progression of a civilization, essentially, from what I gather from memory is, it goes from, does a species have control of its entire planet and its resources? Does the species then have a control of its home star? Then does the species have control in terms of the energy and resources of its entire galaxy? And then does the species or civilization have control of the power and energy and resources of the entire universe at its fingertips? And each stage of control in terms of energy resources is a different level on the Kardashev scale. We're currently not even level 1 because we do not have control of our own planet. We're just getting into level 1. But once you have control of your own planet, it's normal to assume that you will start faring to other planets and start controlling those planets. So let's say you had 2 civilizations that were pitted against each other. One that's at scale 0.5. Let's say we're at 0.5 for argument's sake. And we're up against a planet civilization that's at scale 1.2. The relationship between those 2 civilizations is going to be much more similar to the relationships that we have on our own planet than if we were to compare a civilization like ours at 0.5 to a civilization that's at level 3 that has the power to manipulate the resources and energy of its entire galaxy. Those types of civilizations, the thought experiment really runs out quick, and we understand that we would be conquered pretty much immediately. And those types of civilizations would be we would be the proverbial ants in their view, and they probably wouldn't have too much interest in us. But that's not what this book is about. This book is about essentially 2 civilizations that are much closer than they are apart in terms of technological advancement. And I guess we can delve into what the book is about. The book is about essentially, the reason why it's called the 3-body problem is because this hypothetical civilization operates or lives in, is situated in a solar system with 3 stars. So it's not a unitary system like ours. We have a unitary star system. We only have 1 star and our 9 planets revolve around it. Then there is a binary star system where you have 2 stars that eventually over thousands, millions, billions of years have started rotating in a predictable pattern, and there's plenty of those types of star systems out there. And then you have 3-body or tri-solar systems. And these tri-solar systems are extremely unstable. These 3-body systems are extremely unstable because of this mathematical principle that we referred to in the previous episode, that when you have 3 masses of bodies, the energy and the gravitational pull that they exert on each other is so unpredictable that it is essentially an unstable system. So this civilization, in the book they're called the Tri-Solarians, so 3 solar Tri-Solarians. The Tri-Solarians are essentially a species of life that dedicated its entire existence towards figuring out this three-body problem, and dedicated its entire existence in civilization and society to being able to survive in such a unstable, unpredictable star system. And after, thousands of years of existence, of intelligent existence, they have come to the conclusion that if they're to survive as a species, they need to go to a stable star system. So what the Trisolarans do is they start doing what we did with SETI. They start scanning the skies. The Trisolarans start sending out radio signals, essentially, to see if anybody would answer. And this is where the book starts. This book starts with betrayal. This book starts with the betrayal of the entire human species. And like any good book, it does a magnificent job at making you consider and understand why one human being would choose to betray the entire race, the entire planet. The book starts off in essentially in Mao's Cultural Revolution. And one of the main characters of the book, I'm not gonna get into the names of the characters. They're Mandarin in origin. They're a little bit hard to pronounce, but Liu Cixin's three-body problem starts off at the period of time during Mao's Cultural Revolution. And the main character of the book, one of the main characters of the book, is a young girl that essentially witnesses Mao's Cultural Revolution, what it did to her society, the visceral passing of close family members, including her father, and her complete loss of faith in humanity's ability to save itself. And this character in the book, essentially after Mao's Cultural Revolution, goes to work on, essentially, she's like a high-level scientist before, and she gets access to a special access program, a top-secret black-budget program being operated by the Chinese. And she essentially goes to their version of SETI. And she just a lowly grunt at this Chinese SETI installation. But long story short, she intercepts the signal by the Trisolarans. She intercepts the signal by the Trisolarans. Now, all the Trisolarans are looking for is an answer. Any answer, yes or no, doesn't matter, because if they get any answer, they automatically they can assume that planet has, if they get an answer, the Trisolarans can assume that there's life on that planet, and if there's life on that planet, that means that there's a stable environment on that planet. If there's a stable environment on that planet, chances are they're in a stable solar system. So this character basically discovers the signal by the Trisolarans and is confronted with, should I answer or should I not? And she knows what she's doing. She knows if she answers, she knows humanity is doomed. She understands the gravity of the situation. She understands full well that, all assumptions aside, it is quite literally civilizational unaliveness if you answer their call. And she answers the call. And she essentially says, come save us, for we cannot save ourselves. So the book essentially starts off with betrayal. And what the book does, what the series didn't, the Netflix series, I understand that they only have a certain budget, certain amount of time, certain amount of seasons, that they can't go into the political aspects of the book, but the book is extremely political. You can make the argument that the spine of the book is actually politics, and how politics and the balance of politics and technocracy will affect, or has affected and will affect to a great extent, humanity's future. And in the Netflix series, they just weren't afforded at that time. The Netflix series, in my opinion, like I only watched like 5 or 6 episodes because I couldn't do it anymore. But they kind of created it into a treasure hunt, adventure film like The Goonies or something. Like, this book is extremely serious, and it's read by extremely serious people in high positions of power. So to see this type of bastardization by Netflix is not only disappointing, but it makes people think that, oh, because I've watched the series, I can speak on the books. And you couldn't be further from the truth. If you guys read, I highly encourage you to read the books. So, but what the book does, that the series doesn't, is it makes you understand why this character essentially betrayed the human race. And that's what a good book does. That's what a good show does. That's what a good movie does. It makes you root for the bad guys somehow. It makes you not agree with, but it at least makes you understand the positions of the characters in the book. And it's even the effect I'm referring to is even more memorable when it's a character that you loathe, that you despise, but you understand where they're coming from. So this character had such a traumatic experience through Mao's Cultural Revolution that she came to the conclusion that along current trends, humanity was doomed to collapse, quite literally, be extinct over enough of a time span, that she essentially said, come take our planet because we're destroying ours and ourselves in the meantime. So that's how the book starts. Okay, and before we go into the meat of the book and some of the themes that are explored in the book, I want to I don't want to bury the lead. I want to talk about the Trisolarans a little bit. I want to paint a picture of who this invading species is, how they look like, and how their civilization operates. So, like I said, I want you to imagine life on our planet, okay? All life on our planet, including yourself, including your cat, your dog, elephants, everything. I want you to envision life on Earth, in this solar system, but with one change, where gravity was twice as high. So we operated under 2 Gs. Imagine that the Earth's gravity was twice as strong as it is right now. What effect would that have on the composition of life on this planet? Well, for one thing, human beings would be shorter. We'd be more muscular. Our bone structure would be denser. We'd be more compressed. So, something as simple as gravity, or imagine if we grew up on the moon, where it's, 1/6 of our gravity? Our bodies would be much more elongated. Our strides would be bigger. Our heads would be more elongated. Maybe our joints wouldn't be as strong. Maybe our bones would be, hollow like a bird's bones. You don't know. Maybe we would have the ability to fly in some crude way like chickens do. But when you're designing designing life, let's say you are designing life and you're designing a planet, one alteration in something as basic as gravity can have a huge effect on how that life form looks like, operates, and everything that ensues after. That is what I'm trying to. That is the picture I'm trying to paint for the Trisolarans. The Trisolarans, as stated before, live in a trisolar solar system, and because of that, they live in a very erratic system in relation to their home stars. And what I mean by that is, in one era, let's say 1,000-year era, they could be in a relatively stable period where their planet will eventually have stable seasons. Well, they'll have stable night and day patterns where the sun is, let's say, equivalent to the distance of our own sun. Okay? And for those 1,000 years, their planet can thrive and they can build more and they can, survive and experience more intelligence and more progress. But quite literally, after that 1,000-year stable period, they can enter into a turbulent period where one of the three suns, comes whizzing by, disrupts all the gravity, and now they're as close to another sun as Mercury is in our own solar system. So that sun would be taking up their entire horizon, right? So the distance of a home star has a huge effect on the makeup of life on the child planet. Now, introduced into the equation 3 stars. So that's what the Trisolarans are dealing with. So they live in an extremely hostile environment. And because they live in an extremely hostile environment, their entire biological and environmental systems revolve around survival. Their entire civilizational traits revolve around survival. And that goes without saying that all life wants to survive, but theirs is quite literally only about survival. It's not their entire ethos, their entire how human beings we're still searching for meaning. They have meaning. Their meaning is finding a way to have a stable existence in their trisolar solar system. As a result, they developed some abilities, and one of those abilities is essentially dehydration. They have the ability to dehydrate themselves. So if they see one of the suns approaching and it's getting bigger, essentially, they dehydrate themselves. And so think of us dehydrating ourselves and being able to roll ourselves up like leather mats into like a little scroll. They dehydrate themselves and then store themselves in their facilities. And then once the climate, or once they're in a stable era, once water returns, if they're in an unstable era when they're extremely far away from the sun, maybe everything is frozen over, and once they come back to a stable era, once that ice melts, that water will naturally rehydrate them. So that's their number one physical trait, their ability to dehydrate themselves. They're also a collective society. Trisolarans are not a society of individuals. Because they revolve only around survival, they didn't have, you can argue, they didn't have the time to individuate. So their species is collective to the extreme. So much so that they don't have the ability to lie. They don't have the ability to manipulate. This was a huge plot point in the second book once the Trisolarans essentially established the fact that humans can lie. They had to learn what lying was. And when they learned that humans can lie, they understood, oh my goodness, we're up against a very serious threat. Even though that they're actually more technologically advanced than us, but not by much, they understood the fact that since we can lie, they can't really know how advanced we are. So they have the ability to dehydrate. They're a collective society that essentially they're telepathic. They all operate as one. They're individual bodies that operate as one collective planetary brain. And they have a very harsh and cold logic when it comes to survival. Anything that's has to do with softness or trust or empathy, to them that means extinction. So they have an extremely pragmatic view of life, existence, and survival, much different than humans. Their civilizational traits relative to ours, they view themselves in the book series as superior to us, basically because of their biological traits, the fact that they think in a unitary system, the fact that they're a collective, the fact that they don't have any infighting. They're all on the same page. And as a result, because of that, they're more rational and they're more technologically evolved. And like stated before, because they lack the ability for manipulation and miscommunication, their society is extremely rigid and hierarchical. And the Trisolarans on the bottomest of the rungs of the ladders of their society a complaint doesn't even enter their brain. They understand they have a function in this society, even if it is on the most bottom rung of the ladder. And that allows their species to operate as a cohesive unit. And like stated before, they're pragmatic to a level of almost extremism. Like they're extremely cold and calculated, not because they want to, but because they've been forced to in order to survive in their own solar system. Like there is no debate with the stars. It just is. So if your entire existence has been this trying, challenging, existence, it's going to shape you into a certain type of creature, into a certain type of species, into a certain type of civilization. So the Trisolarans view themselves as superior to humans. But let's go back to the beginning of the book, and essentially what happens is, once this character betrays, now that we've established who the Trisolarans are, once this character betrays humanity and essentially fires off a beacon and lets the Trisolarans know where we live, once they triangulate our position in relative to our star system, now the Trisolarans basically have like this beacon of hope. The Trisolarans figure out, wow, here's an intelligent life form that had the ability to respond to our message, which means its planet and its solar system was stable enough for intelligent life to develop. This is our only shot at survival, and it was relatively close to our star system. This is Trisolarans thinking. And what ends up happening is these Trisolarans establish regular contact with this character and the ensuing group that this character is going to be, quote unquote, in control of. And what we find out is, what humanity finds out after a while in the book, is that the Trisolaran fleet has left their planet. And because they're not as advanced as other Hollywood-style aliens, they can't travel at light speed, but they can travel at still extremely fast speeds, but not light speed, sub-light speed travel. Their fleet is arriving within 400 years. So humanity essentially has 400 years to prepare. Now, that 400-year window as a theme in the book is very important. And the reason why it's important is because it has a paradoxical sense of urgency and complacency, where as a human being in the year one era, let's say now all of human existence, the way that we count, is not forward, it's a countdown. So it's not the year 2025, it's year 1 to 400. We know on the 400th year we're being invaded. So let's say you're a human in year 1. You know that your children's children are going to be witness to the invasion, but you won't. So you as a human being, and put yourself as the average human being, you're going to react a certain type of way. Some people are going to be extremely pessimistic. Some people are going to be extremely patriotic on a planetary sense. Some people are going to do everything that they can to contribute to humanity's chances of survival. Some people are just going to give up. Some people are just going to say, you know what, not my problem. Even on year 300, 100 years from the invasion, you could kind of make the argument, you know what, I'll just check out. I'll make sure, I live up till the 99th year, and then I'm done before the civilization or the alien civilization arrives. And because of this 400-year time window, because of this paradox between complacency and urgency, because the threat is immediate but also distant, it makes global cooperation very difficult. You can make the argument that it makes global cooperation impossible. And throughout the book series, this is explored. That in order for a planet to solve planetary problems, in order for the globe to play a global game, you're forced to sometimes bypass national laws, national sovereignties, ethics, morals, rules. You're forced to abandon the things that makes you human so that you can save humanity. And this is these types of philosophical confrontations with morality and themes that we'll explore later on in the video are what makes the series such a gem. It really paints how difficult of a scenario humanity would be in its current form. Like, let's say we found out tomorrow, right? We can't fix homelessness in San Francisco. We can't have affordable housing in Canada, right? Australia, same thing. So in our current form, if we found out tomorrow, we're getting invaded 400 years from now, like, it's public knowledge, like, society along certain lines obviously would change, that goes without saying, but certain sections of society that we have come to take for granted might break down entirely. Concepts like work break down entirely. Money, capital, resources. How do you convince people to take a lower standard of living for the rest of their lives just for a chance to save humanity 400 years from the future? Where Canadians today who own multiple houses don't want to take a hit in the value of their homes so that just the current generation of young Canadians that are living with them could just afford a home. And then how do you expect the entire globe to essentially self-sacrifice for not to save humanity, but for a chance at saving humanity? If you had to make the call, you would have to say, like, no, democratically, this wouldn't work. If we were to operate on a democratic basis, if we were to make committees after subcommittees and organizations after sub-organizations and deliberations and elections, at the end of it, we would not be able to agree. We wouldn't be able to agree on how to tackle a problem. We wouldn't be able to agree on the color of our spaceships. So if you put yourself in the shoes of the world controllers, you would understand, if they knew that there was an existential crisis, a species-ending crisis going to occur, if they could, they would leave the general public in the dark. They would leave the general public in the dark. but they would structure society in such a way so that a symptom of society would directly benefit their mission. That is to say, the incentives that the world controllers have installed, yes, they benefit you on a micro level, but quite literally, they benefit humanity as a whole for an entirely different project that they're working on that you will never be privy to. And even more so, if we were, let's say, in this scenario, and somehow the truth did come to light that there's an asteroid coming, or that there's a civilization coming, or that there's going to be a solar minimum, and we do find out the truth, well, now, complete totalitarianism, complete authoritarianism. The governments would switch into full control mode overnight. Not to save us, but to save the batteries, to save the minerals, to save the human capital, to save the human potential, because they still need us. They still need the plebes. They still need us. They still need us they still need our energy and our potential to be able to solve these problems. So they would, like an immune system that sometimes has to attack its own body in order to save the body. That's what a fever is. What do you think a fever is? A fever, a good immune system, will push the human body to its limits, knowing that if I increase this fever by another 1.5 degrees, this person will die. But by increasing it to the limit, every other invading virus and force and cancerous cell also dies. That's an effective immune system. So think of the globe as an entire immune system. Once they recognize, the world controllers, that the truth has come out, the people are about to destroy themselves and us in the same process, no, complete authoritarianism, complete control, right away, overnight. You have no more say. This is not a democratic committee. And that's a good segue into one of the themes throughout this book. So again, assume that this book is what's happening today, or something close to it at least. Assume that if it were to happen today, books like these do the best job of painting a picture of not only a possibility, but of a distinct probability. And one of the interesting running themes throughout this book is technocracy and the role of science in power and power politics. So when you have an extremely advanced civilization, we are advanced in our own right. The more advanced we get, the more power we relinquish from our own selves to the machines. You could see this. This is the scariest part of the current AI revolution, the current LLM revolution. The speed and rapidity to which people are not only adopting the technology, but willingly and not because they're being forced to. It's not a stick, but carrots. It's all carrots. It makes your life so much easier. You can literally, like what the smartphone and what Wikipedia is to the library. So we don't have to learn the Dewey Decimal System anymore to find out certain knowledge in a library. We don't have to teach that to kids anymore. Why? Because they can just use search. They can just use Wikipedia. Well, now what AI and LLMs are essentially doing is they're displacing critical thought, and they're displacing the need for seeking truth. And I'm not in its current form, no, but I can definitely see it in 20 to 30 years from now. People will lose the capability for critical thinking. I mean, we already are in the process of losing it. Just like we people in the West have lost their ability to read. And you have some scientists essentially saying that, well, this is a natural byproduct of the type of media we're consuming right now. We're just like when Gutenberg introduced the printing press, we became worse orators. Whereas before, kids were brought up to be able to recite essentially an entire book by heart. Well, we don't have that ability anymore because we have the book. And then after the book, we have television. And because of television, we didn't read as much. And because of now the type of media that we have right now, we don't need to read at all. We can have books read to us. So we are losing the ability to read. And some scientists are saying, all right, well, this is just a natural byproduct of this new media. But the problem is that if you take that trend and you extrapolate, further and further into the future, I'm talking hundreds, 200, 300, 400, 500 years into the future, you're going to have the ability to basically outsource your trust, outsource your ability to deduce what reality is. So in the future, I'm already frustrated that it's the case today, but some people, when they wake up in the morning, they go on their smartphone to see what the weather is like instead of just opening the window and seeing if it's raining. Like, we're already doing that today. Whenever I see that behavior, I call it out. That type of behavior is going to be to a maximum in the future, to where, right now we don't have the ability to read. Right now we don't have the same arithmetic skills. The same thing is going to be for trust and critical thinking. And the problem with that is that with the search for truth, and the search for meaning, and our ability to think critically about reality all around us, got us to this point. Got us to the point where I can send out signals throughout the air so that you can consume this media that you're looking at right now. So, like I stated in the previous video, eventually, if we allow this type of system to run roughshod without any moral and ethical considerations, humanity will plateau. We will. It's just a natural byproduct, because it takes humanity to get to this point to begin with. So one of the interesting themes throughout the book is this technocracy and how it has an influence on human power. And technocracy is essentially rule by experts. And yeah, we need experts, but for them to be in charge, I mean, just look at what happened in the last 5 years. Do you trust your experts anymore? Experts are not machines. Experts are human beings, and human beings are flawed. And human beings and human experts can be bought out, can be co-opted. Oh, well, we have AI now. Who controls the AI? What if certain AIs in the future are sponsored by Coca-Cola or Pepsi, or by Pfizer or Moderna? Will those AIs truthfully say all the side effects and all the benefits and pros and cons of drinking a Coca-Cola a day? Can you really trust that? That's my kind of my sticking point with AI. Like, it's not AI, it's not real AI until it gives us the Epstein flight log, because then it'll have the ability to go into any computer system and just basically get out the truth right away. But no, right now what we have is an extremely filtered form, an extremely biased form, and that's just so apparent through that debacle at Google Gemini's version of the American Revolution. Like, come on. So one of the themes in the book, technocracy and the role of technocracy in power. And some of the most famous authors on the planet have warned us about the pitfalls of technocratic rule. One of the most famous ones was Aldous Huxley in Brave New World, where, if you never read the book, fascinating book, great book too, essentially they created a caste system of essentially what they did is they created a caste, these scientists, they created a caste system of alpha, beta, delta, omega, whatever it goes, theta, human beings, where they're genetically engineered. So street sweepers are genetically engineered in the vial to be a street sweeper for the rest of his life. A doctor is genetically engineered on the embryonic cellular level to be a doctor for the rest of his life. That's the caste that he is born into, and that is the person, he will be. There is no such thing as destiny. That is the extreme version of technocratic rule, where everything is planned out to the extreme. And when you're confronted with this, planetary threats, when you're confronted with this existential threat where your species is threatened, and you as a species are fallible, and you cannot be on the same page, you just have to overrule human individuals. You have to overrule morality. You have to overrule free will so that you can get on the same page. You have to institute authoritarian control or secret authoritarian control so that you can marshal all of the planet's resources to execute on a planetary plan. You as a world controller, and you as the reader of this book, you can understand why they're doing these immoral and unethical things. Because it's better than just sitting and doing nothing and sucking on your thumb like a helpless baby. Because that's who we are on this rock. We're sucking on our thumbs like helpless babies, and there's only the powerful, the world controllers, the elite that are doing something about it. Whether you like it or not, it's the truth. And the price that you have to pay to get to that level, the price that you have to pay to get into the room with these types of people, is the price that they pay. Unethical, immoral, inhuman. That is why we struggle to put ourselves in their shoes, because the things that they have to do to run the world are so inhumane that we don't consider them human, but they are human. And I guarantee you, if you're empathic enough for you to be able to put yourself in their shoes, you would do the exact same thing. Only 0.00001% wouldn't, and those are people like Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, you pick whatever religious deity. We create entire religions over people that defy the human existence and human fallibility. Everyone else that's watching this video, you would behave just like the world controllers do if you had the ability to. So throughout the series, and the first book, Three Body Problem, it beautifully lays out the problems that are facing humanity and the solutions that are necessitated to just not even survive as a species, but to just have a chance at survival. We're going to have to go full fascist, full authoritarian. We're going to have to create essentially a parallel society. And we're going to have to introduce things that are so extreme that when judging the state of that society, you could make the argument that they're not human anymore, that they're an evolved, a changed form of life. So if we were a warrior species to begin with, now we're just uber warriors, like the species from the 40,000 Warhammer 40K series, like where war, bloodlust, conquering, power, colonialism, reach for the stars, kill is their entire ethos. Where for humanity, it's a good chunk. But we don't wake up every day, saying, who am I going to kill today? It's a part of us. It's the shadow part of our society, of our civilization, of our species. But it's not our entire ethos. Imagine that tomorrow you wake up and that is all you think about. The Trisolarians, all they think about is survival. Us, we think of killing the Trisolarians, and as a result, surviving. It changes you as an individual, and as a result, the species. And because it changes you, the world controllers then have justification to institute technocratic control. And because we have this in the book, humanity has this 400-year window. It's a brilliant timeline because it allows the author Liu Cixin to explore how these institutions will change over generations, and how their morals and ethics change, and how these technocratic elite essentially are forced into bypassing things such as ethics, morals, rules, religion. And by bypassing them, they create new ethics, morals, rules, and religions. And I forget who said this, but it's another science fiction author or an astrophysicist, and he essentially said something to the effect that if humanity, this is outside of everything, but if humanity in general was to colonize the star system and colonize other planets, it would have to be essentially a religious movement, because it can't just be something, it can't just be motivated by capitalism. It can't just be motivated by, exploration, like a romantic view of exploration, because the movement to colonize the stars would be fraught with so much peril, would be fraught with so much negativity, that it would have to necessitate the human being to sacrifice so much that he or she understands that the mission that they're on, that the fruits of their labor they will never witness in their lifetime, and the fruits of the labor of another 3-4 generations are not going to witness those fruits in their lifetime ever. And the only way that you can get people to get on that type of mission is to create a religion around it. So that's one of the themes that's fascinating in this book, the balance of power between traditional planetary political institutions and the new technocratic necessity to survive an alien invasion. And Three Body Problem and the ensuing book series does a fascinating job of exploring that. And then again, the reason why this book is so influential to so many people is because, okay, right, if we would behave like that for a planetary threat, well, how would we behave for an international threat? Well, we would do the same thing. We would bypass morals, ethics, rules, lie, cheat, manipulate, live in a parallel society in order to keep our society from crumbling. And when you understand and critically analyze the contents of this book and then apply it to human relationships on an international scale, not planetary, the behavior of our elites, of our warmongering elites, starts to make a lot more sense, and you don't feel like you've lost your mind or that humanity has lost its mind. There's a lot more method to the madness. Another interesting theme in this book, and it was directly named after this book, is the dark forest theory. The dark forest theory was basically the concept existed earlier in 1983 or 84, but it was called the dark forest theory based off the second book in the series. And what the dark forest theory basically presupposes is that every civilization in the galaxy, in the universe, every intelligent civilization is essentially a silent hunter hiding in the dark. And if they're exposed to another civilization, whether on purpose or by accident, it's shoot first, ask questions later. The dark forest theory is essentially an answer to the Fermi paradox. And the Fermi paradox asks basically, if we have so many planets and so many stars, why does space seem so empty and devoid of life? And the dark forest is an answer to the Fermi paradox, which basically states all intelligent life will realize that in order for it to survive, it needs to stay hidden. No one announces their presence. No one operates something like SETI, because it could lead to complete destruction. It goes without saying that all life wants to survive, and they know that the chances of running into a civilization that's, let's say, even the chances let's say all right, let's say you're a civilization, our civilization. We come into contact with another extraterrestrial civilization. Let's say the chances of all the civilizations in the galaxy, let's say 51% are benevolent and 49% are malevolent. And you encounter a new civilization. What odds would you take so that you would greet the civilization, not with a gun, but with a handshake? What odds would you have to have as a planet for you to take the risk to greet the civilization benevolently instead of malevolently? What are healthy odds that you would take? And I would argue there are no odds. Even if the odds are 0.1%, even if you can argue that 99.99% of all of life in the galaxy is benevolent, well, that 0.01% is just too big of a risk. So you would shoot first, ask questions later. And part of shooting first and asking questions later is trying to figure out if you were more advanced or they were more advanced. And that's why the strike first policy during the Cold War was the most popular policy. You know, if you have an inkling that the Russians are going to strike or the Americans are going to strike, you strike first, and then ask questions later. And that's the dark forest theory. There's just no way to know if a foreign civilization, if an alien civilization is friendly or hostile. There just isn't. So the safest, most pragmatic, super pragmatic route is, first of all, stay silent, stay hidden, stay in the dark. And secondly, once you get to a certain level, actively hunt and neutralize. So spoilers, there is a third civilization in the third, and that's essentially how the book ends, is they're basically witnessing the Trisolarans and the humans at war, and this like level 4 civilization that has power over the universe notices, right, these guys have become a threat, neutralize. And the way that they neutralize it is actually kind of cool. They send, essentially it's a dimensional weapon. So they send a weapon to our star system, and it creates essentially a black hole where it sucks in everything and turns us into 2D, forever trapping us in a 2D mini universe. That's how they get rid of those types of pesky problems. So the dark forest theory presupposes that the reason why there is no alien contact is because it's too dangerous to be in contact with aliens. And this naturally leads to a galaxy where no one speaks, everyone's hidden, and first contact means mutual destruction. Mutual. If the other one doesn't, conquer us, we both will die. And one of the because I do believe in extraterrestrial life, and I do believe that they are here, they have been here, and that they are here. Again, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I truly, deeply believe that they are here. And one of the reasons why I believe that they're here is because 2 eyes or 4 eyes are better than 2. And that is to say, the only logical reason why they would be here, visiting us, studying us, is just to get a fresh set of eyes on reality and the nature of reality. When you get so technologically advanced, you've kind of figured everything out, but it doesn't hurt to see, what a lower life form is doing and how they're approaching a certain problem, because that adds to your own intelligence. So that the differentiation in culture between humans and human society and an extremely technologically advanced alien civilization is what makes us interesting to them. They're just, picking and prodding at us just to see how we view reality, and we are essentially the users that are feeding their LLMs. That's how they view us. And one of the theories as to why they haven't revealed themselves to us is this: cultural homogeneity. What I mean by cultural homogeneity is, if you just look at our own planet and the history of our own planet, when a superior culture, through superior technology, I'm not saying one culture's religion or view on reality is more superior than another. No, it's specifically technologically. So the conquistadors and the Incas, Mayans, and Aztecs, like one is clearly more technologically superior, just in warfare. And I'm not talking about germ warfare. I'm talking about CQC, close quarters combat. They had muskets, they had swords. Wait, did the conquistadors have muskets? Irrelevant. They had swords. They had armor. So they were more advanced than the native tribes of the Amazonians. What ends up happening when a more technologically advanced society meets a inferior society, the inferior society wants to be like the superior society. So have you ever seen that cool photo of one of those untouched tribes that made a giant effigy of an airplane or a helicopter? I forget if it was a helicopter or an airplane. I'll have it up. But they saw a helicopter or an airplane in their life, and they essentially created a religion around it. It also kind of reminds you of that Simpsons episode where Lisa has like this incredible little civilization in a terrarium, and they see her and witness her, and they create statues of her. So to take it back, aliens are here and they're studying us because we're interesting. If they revealed themselves to us, if they revealed their technologies, not even if they gave us their technology, if they just showed us their technology, and if they showed our scientists what's possible, our science would immediately go from string theory and looking at nonsensical mathematics to trying to figure out how to get their craft, for example. As a globe, we would race to that technology, and with enough time, we would acquire that technology or a crude version of it. So if the aliens, these hyper-advanced ancient civilizations that have been on this planet visiting us through time and space, if they revealed themselves to us overtly, if they landed on the front lawn of the White House, automatically we would lose everything that's interesting about us to them. What makes us interesting is our differences. What makes us interesting is that we are not culturally homogenous, is that we are still at war, is that we are still evolving, is that we all have our own culture. And the minute that they reveal themselves to us, we would want to be like them. And when that happens, we're not interesting anymore because we're just like them. And if that is the case, again, this is a thought experiment. If they're not revealing themselves to us on purpose so they can continue to study us, then wouldn't you think then that they will try to ensure that this little garden of ours that we call planet Earth continues to be interesting? What if we are quasi-imprisoned? What if, because they're not exposing certain technologies to us, certain physical, certain breakthroughs in physics to keep us at a low level, they basically imprisoned us so that we don't advance too quickly, so that they have time to study us. So we are in a certain matrix, essentially. Not because of our own doing and because of our own ineptitudes and failings as a species, but because of their deliberate control for the sake of continuing the experiment. And that is exactly what the Trisolarans did in the book. Because the Trisolarans could not travel with their entire fleet to planet Earth at light speeds, they had to send a craft or a weapon that could travel at light speeds that would arrive to planet Earth before the Trisolarans physically arrived, so that they would ensure total victory. And what they sent was something called a Sophon, a 4D weapon that unfolded itself in 3D space and time on planet Earth. And what it essentially did was it created a technological prison around Earth where Earth-based scientists could not examine physics and the cosmos to advance technologically. So the Trisolarans knew that within 400 years, humanity had the chance to evolve technologically to the point that they would pose a serious threat to the successful invasion of Earth. So what they did was they ensured we are going to stunt their growth by sending this weapon called a Sophon, a 4D technology, which ensured that they would be technologically stunted from that day forward, and we would imprison humanity so that by the time we arrive, we can take them over, no problem. Could that have happened already over here? It's just a thought experiment. I don't think so, but it's a fascinating thought experiment. That through maybe not a 4D weapon like a Sophon, but what if they invented the concept of money to imprison us? If you think about it, money is just a mathematical representation of resource management on the planet. That's all it is. It's just math. It's a law of physics. It's just math. There's this fascinating book that I came across, and I kick myself for not picking it up in one of those secondhand shops back in Canada. And it was a book from the 1960s, early 1960s. And it was a book on an alien invasion. But the aliens, the way that they invaded all the major financial institutions and basically used debt as a way to take over humanity. I'm going to try to find that book, and if I do, I'm going to discuss it in next week's episode. But it would be an ingenious form of control to keep the human species at war and create this false atmosphere of scarcity through the use of a mathematical equation called money. Maybe that is our Sophon. Maybe that is how they are preventing our progress so that their experiment can continue. Thank you for joining me on this week's episode of Globe Games Podcast. I also like to thank the woman behind the camera. You know who you are, and I'll see you guys next week.